Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Example. I'm here to pretend that I've got jokes today when in reality I don't have any. Alright, no. I'm Example, here to do my day job and my time off, as always. And more specifically, I'm here to finish up my Doki Doki Literature Club video series. This is part 3, end of the road. You know, I actually started this series like a month ago, honestly, while on vacation. And you know, because my regular day-to-day schedule was so completely fucked from being on break, it took me absolutely fucking forever to finally finish. But you know, really, I don't feel too bad about it because usually people complain that I finish too fast. Like 5-10 minutes at most, to ask one of my exes. Just kidding. For real though, if you haven't seen parts 1 or 2 yet, I'll leave a link down in the description for you if you're interested. And before I forget, spoiler warning, if you care, take off now guys, and go spend 3 hours finishing one of the cleverest, most compelling VNs I've ever seen this side of a $0 price tag. Quickly recap Doki Doki Literature Club parts 1 and 2. Starting with, I suppose, the basic premise of the game, which we went over in part 1. After school, literature and poetry club full of cute anime honeys that fall in love with you. We've discussed the individual characters at length as well, especially Monika. Talked about the excellent atmospheric tension and tight execution. Also going into some detail regarding the best and worst bits of the overall experience. And that all brings me pretty neatly around to the subject of this video. And, in my opinion, to the most important, most fascinating mystery that Doki Doki Literature Club has to offer. Although, to explain that question, I kind of have to also explain how in my original review, I actually listed this very issue, this mystery, as the game's biggest flaw. Suffice it to say, with the benefits of 2020 hindsight and a few extra months to think, of course, I've actually come all the way around and now believe that it's the game's biggest strength. Let's dive right in. I'll explain as we go. Do you remember a little earlier on in part 2 how we discussed the contrivances of the second half of the game, which all but erase the character of the protagonist until he barely has lines or choices at all? You remember the way those contrivances basically reduce the protagonist to essentially a blank slate avatar for the player to inhabit, making the protagonist no more than the means by which the player interacts with Monika. So that's a function of the story, of course. Needless to say, it's a major problem. In order for the internal story logic of the DDLC plot to remain consistent during the second half, where the VN is breaking and everything is going to shit, basically, it's pretty much necessary for the protagonist to stay suspiciously, conspicuously quiet. But, you know, it's a terrible solution. It's a terrible one. And it was one of my biggest complaints, of course. If you're curious, by the way, just quickly, how this actually works in-game, really it's a process of slowly replacing the protagonist character with the player of the game. Basically, from early on, Act 3, the rest of Act 3 and all of Act 4, they're built basically like one-way streets that transmit data one way. The game communicates to the player from start to finish using the protagonist. That's your one-way street of communication in the second half. But down the stretch, the player no longer communicates with the game using the protagonist the way you did in the first half. Our character stops proactively engaging with dialogue first, then he stops answering questions completely, he stops making decisions completely, and then eventually just stops responding at all. To the point where this protagonist is doing so little for these girls, it reminds me of my last few relationships. Oh, man. Wow. Emily, I'm so sorry. More importantly than all of that, though, here's where that incredibly wild question, the mystery I was talking about earlier comes into play. This, right here, is the most interesting aspect of the entire franchise, if you ask me. You see, that narrative one-way street we were just talking about, it actually also renders the entire premise of this being an interactive romantic visual novel basically unnecessary. I mean, yeah, as a consequence of subverting the logic of the actual game world, by having Monika take over the story, the entire interactive aspect of this VN can effectively be removed, just excised, without this story actually losing anything. I mean, yeah, I'll explain everything in a second in detail. Just, this is mind-blowing. For real, we can literally cut out every decision point, every interactive element, and yet the story works just fine. For this analysis, guys, really, we're going to need to take a closer look at some specifics. First of all, right from the start, it doesn't even matter what you want anyway at all. As a player, you have no real choice here. Your protagonist will start the game by joining the literature club. Every time. For Sayori at first, Sayori, and some cupcakes, and then for Monika and her irresistible smile. We can keep going. No matter what poetry you write, no matter which girl you write it for, the school festival will always be your cutoff date, and you'll encounter the same plot device set pieces every time along the way. You can't make any decisions within them. The set pieces follow predetermined dialogue lines to scripted conclusions, not to mention they're full of emotional buildup and drama that never gets paid off in the story. There's more. Day-to-day story progress is linear. Daily events unfold according to schedules, neatly arranged into modular segments by scripted dialogue cues that never change. Time isn't linear, on the other hand, in DDLC, far from it, but try as you might, you're absolutely helpless to influence its passage in any way, and can't even begin to affect the timing of its predetermined script triggers. Lest you think what you do or say matters. Nope. Also irrelevant, Sayori will hang herself on schedule, and you will find her dead in her room, triggering a game crash, also right on schedule. Yuri and Natsuki hide their issues in the first half of the VN, expertly in fact. No matter what, both of their problems will also be exposed and spill out in the second half regardless. Whether you like Yuri or not, she will stab herself to death after giving her confession to you. Likewise, whether or not you like Natsuki, her neck will break and she... etc., etc. You get it, right? I mean, most importantly, though, irregardless of what you say, regardless of what you do, you won't be able to pursue Monika or her roots until Act 4, the endgame. Once you get there, of course, you immediately, promptly, had no route but hers to choose from. Yeah. Really, no matter which girl you like best, in fact, or how much you like them, no matter how much time you dedicate to them, you can't end up with any of them. Your choices are Monika in Act 4 or nothing. That's always true, no matter what. Let's go over it again. Maybe twice more. No, the fact is, we could go over these a million more times, but the reality is we simply won't ever find a reason why this story needs to be told as a VN. It's not there, I promise you. There's literally no real reason for this story to be a game. It's not an interactive story. I mean, I really should say there's no reason for it to pretend to be an interactive story, really. Like, only the tiniest, most negligible, superficial expositionary dialogue details would be compromised by removing every interactive set piece wholesale from front to back and just laying the plot out. It's incredible. And we're really just scratching the surface here. It actually gets really good now. Get this. Even though, fundamentally speaking, this really just means Doki Doki Literature Club is a crazily shallow visual novel missing a ton of features, in effect. A bunch of actual routes for the other three girls, for one. I mean, some different endings at least, and, you know, all the actual decisions to make, since none of your choices mean anything to the plot as it currently exists. But look here, pivotally, crucially, all of these elements are intentionally missing. And it's priceless specifically because of that. It is of utmost importance that none of these are in the game, because all of that missing stuff, the lack of it rather, that's what allows Doki Doki Literature Club to tell a greater story. This ends up being such a brilliant postmodern subversion and deconstruction that it's actually become more valuable as a self-contained object of narrative art than it ever was, even as a 10 out of 10 game. If you ask me, it's just absolutely brilliant, guys. I mean, believe it or not, the whole story of Doki Doki Literature Club could be easily told in novel form. It could have been told as an anime, or a movie, or even as a manga, light novel, or poem. I mean, any of these would have been tremendously exciting, popular, and generally successful. I'm sure the rest of the media, press, and I would have probably all fawned over it just the same, like I actually did, and given it great reviews, again, just like I actually did. The fact that instead, the story of Doki Doki Literature Club was told as a VN on purpose, for a reason, in other words, it's because Doki Doki Literature Club intentionally set itself up as an ostensibly interactive narrative experience, despite being a thoroughly scripted, predetermined sequence of scheduled story events that lead to a fixed conclusion, and thereby it becomes a piece of revolutionary postmodern deconstruction, specifically in this case, a postmodern deconstruction of the genre and medium. One of the best I've ever seen. Absolutely. This right here is what makes DDLC more valuable and impressive as a piece of self-contained postmodern art than as a visual novel or a story or a game of any kind, if you ask me. Not only does it openly engage and then subvert every romance game trend and trope, deconstructing both the romance genre and the VN medium as a whole, while creating the nuanced illusion of choice and framing everything around a self-aware, obsessively lovesick girl. Not only does it masterfully use broken and impossible space in an increasingly crippled game world with damaged narrative logic and a disjointed warping of the passage of time, all to reinforce its subversion of standard romance VN design philosophies. Not only does the progression of Monika's character arc from her initial realization of self-awareness to her fixation on the player and finally acceptance of ultimate meaninglessness, all of that reflects the actual meta-narrative experience of the visual novel as a whole, again echoing the already overstated symbolic equivalency between Monika as a character and Doki Doki Literature Club as a game. It also further symbolizes the already overstated disconnect between what Monika is and what she seems to be. In other words, between herself and her reality, her world. Exactly the way her deconstructed story stands at odds with its own genre and medium. It does all of that, all of it, seamlessly, and, you know, that is amazing for sure, but even more amazing, perhaps, is the fact that you don't even need to know any of this to enjoy the game and the story. That may well be Doki Doki Literature Club's greatest accomplishment, and it is, in other words, why I had to remind myself again and again that DDLC is more than art. It's ingenious, sure, how the game itself serves as a postmodern response to the game's own medium and genre. Sure, it's amazing how that response is intentionally subject to the same assumptions and limitations that govern the medium and genre it's responding to. But, you know, first and foremost, DDLC was, and still is, an amazing, incredible game. A game experience. And that's what I thought of it when I first played it before launch, too. It's a VN I awarded a perfect 10 out of 10 after all, and I don't regret that one bit. Of course, with that being said, now, if you ask me, even though I do still believe DDLC deserves a 10 out of 10 when being judged as a game, I honestly can't help thinking that I would give it a 20 out of 10 if I could, a 30 out of 10, a 100 out of 10 if I could when judging it as a piece of art. It's a meta-narrative object, self-contained, a classic deconstruction, and it's all brilliant. In the end, we do really have here a truly unique, standalone monument, a bastion of subversion and postmodern storytelling, metafiction, and aesthetic value. Well, that's all I've got for you tonight, guys, really. Thank you so much for your time, as always, and I really can't even begin to express how much I appreciate it. Although this is the end of my first little video series on Doki Doki Literature Club, parts 1, 2, and 3 all uploaded now, I will make sure to continue covering this franchise in the future. There's tons more to talk about, and I might even LP it at some point, let's play it at some point. I've been talking to some people about that, honestly, especially since this is a VN series that I'm very passionate about. I guess that's just Monika for you, right? Thank you guys so much again. 3-part Jalal and Urza series this week if you're interested. Hope to see you guys there. And until next time.